Okay, this is the Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. We are here for Legislative Oversight, LO 19-0060, Budget Oversight Hearing for the Baltimore City Police Department. City Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined to my left by Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, Vice Chair of the Committee.
Thank you, Mr.
To his
Chair.
left, Council President Brandon Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, 13th District, member of the committee. Councilwoman Danny McCray, 2nd District, member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr.
Councilman
Chair.
Chris Burnett, 8th District. To my right, Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. Then we also have, to my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. Representing Mayor Jack Young, we have Matt Stegman and Deputy Chief of Staff Sonny Schnitzer. We have Kaylin Young, Legislative Director for Council President Scott, as well as Rebecca Bishop, who is attorney for City Council. I think that covers everyone. Tonight's hearing is televised and being streamed online, so if you're testifying, please be sure to speak into the microphone. If you do not speak into the microphone, I'm going to politely interrupt you and remind you to speak into the microphone. I'm reminded to speak into the microphone by the council president. Thank you, Mr. President. I ask if members of the public, if you have cell phones, as well as members of the media, please turn those to off, vibrate, silent, or some other setting which does not make noise. We are going to turn it over to Commissioner Harrison. Commissioner, before you begin, if you could introduce everyone from your senior staff that's here with you this evening, and then take it away.
Good evening, Chairman Costello, Chairman Schleifer, and Mr. President, and members of the City Council, to the residents watching at home. Before I introduce everyone, just let me say that the fact that we're before you just a few days before Thanksgiving is not lost on me. So in keeping with the Thanksgiving tradition, I want to just take a brief moment to give thanks for a number of things. First and foremost, incredibly thankful to the men and women, the sworn and civilian men and women who work tirelessly to serve the residents of Baltimore every day. They keep our residents safe and are critical to the department's success. And it is their energy and commitment, their faith, that will help keep and continue to improve how we operate daily. And I want to say thank you to all of the BPD family. Number two, I want to say thank you to the residents who pledge their support and their assistance at every safety walk and at every community meeting that I attend. They have expressed their willingness to partner with the Baltimore Police Department to make it a safer place for us to work, for all of us to live and raise our children, and I'm so very thankful for them. And together we will make Baltimore Police Department the greatest comeback story and police department in America, one that we can all be thankful for. And with that, I will move into my presentation for the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Start by recognizing our Deputy Chief of Staff from the Mayor's Office, Sonny Schnitzer, and Deputy Commissioner of Operations, Michael Sullivan. I have with us also the Deputy Commissioner of Administration Bureau, Jim Gillis, the Deputy Commissioner of the Public Integrity Bureau, Brian Nadeau, my Chief of Staff, Eric Melanson, my Deputy Chief of Staff, Andrew Smullian, the Chief of the Criminal Investigations Division, Colonel Cherie Briscoe, and Chief of Patrol, Colonel Richard Worley. Lieutenant Colonel Monique Brown, I don't believe is here, but Lieutenant Colonel John Herzog is here from our Detective Bureau. Our Chief Technology Officer is here, Woody Davis. My Director of Governmental Affairs, Michelle Wertzberger, is here also. Thank you for having me and having my executive team meet with you. As always, we view these hearings as a critical opportunity to provide information on our efforts to change the culture at the Baltimore Police Department and to embrace and implement strong, thoughtful management practices and reforms. While we still have a long way to go, I'm confident that we're moving certainly in the right direction. Starting with overtime. When I was sworn in last March, there were a number of pressing issues that I need to start addressing immediately. Obviously, addressing the crime was at the forefront of that list, but the department's lack of internal accountability and lax business practices complicated the crime fight. It led to overspending with little to no beneficial outcomes and prevented the ranking file from getting clear direction from frontline supervisors. My executive team and I have been working tirelessly to change that paradigm, and we are definitely seeing the fruit of that labor in the form of sustainable positive trends. When I started, we, the department, we were spending about $2 million or more on every pay period. We were on the path to the end of the year being over budget, and our efforts were exhausted from working an unhealthy amount of overtime. our officers were exhausted from working an unhealthy amount of overtime. As you can see from these slides, we continue to be below the target level of overtime spending per payroll period that we need to be to stay within or below budget. There was a significant jump in overtime spending in the 9th payroll period, but over $500,000 of that amount was due to the marathon and Light City special event coverage during that period. In our most recent pay period, we were $150,000 below the budget target. With the department that has a number of sworn vacancies as we do, overtime resources will continue to be needed to flex the size of the department to secure the city. However, when overtime is authorized, it is now done so strategically and responsibly. As we mentioned last month, within our newly designed CompStat process, we've been tracking which districts are complying with the new standards and teaching commanders to think strategically about how, where, and when, and why they should deploy overtime resources. I want to compliment our members and our command staff for embracing this change. Staffing and recruiting. As of today, we have 2,460 sworn members to include trainees and cadets among our current personnel. With a budgeted strength of 2,661 sworn positions, that leaves 201 sworn vacancies. We're also budgeted for 588 civilian positions, and we currently have 530 non-sworn members, leaving 58 vacancies we are actively working to fill. As you know, we are working diligently to professionalize the department by hiring professionals who are experts in their field, who can help guide the change through implementation of national best practices. To that end, we have filled a number of important vacancies through the hiring of a curriculum writer, a research analyst, evidence collection personnel, and IT professionals. The next slide outlines where we are with recruitment and attrition this year. We have seen 162 sworn members leave the department in 2019, but this is actually the lowest average monthly separation rate we've seen in 6 years. We are on track to having between 13 to 22% reduction in the attrition levels compared to 2018. The Administrative Duties Division, something new. I want to update you on the creation of our Administrative Duties Division, which is a centralized chain of command for all personnel who are on limited duty or long-term medical status. Last month, we identified 113 personnel who were distributed throughout the department and announced that effective October 13th, they will be transferred to the Administrative Duties Division, and their overtime and secondary employment authorization would be significantly restricted. As of the last hearing, we had 25 limited duty personnel from that list indicate that they were then available for full duty status. As of today, since the policy change, 54 members have returned to full duty. This result is outstanding. We will continue to actively manage these members so that we are ensuring they are staying on the path to getting better and returning to work as soon as possible. In future meetings, we will continue to provide you updated status on this program. When it comes to technology, you've heard me say many times that technology will enable us to better utilize our resources, protect the public better, and become more transparent about where, when, and how we're policing. I'm excited to report that we have made tremendous strides toward improving the way the department views and utilizes technology. Since our new Chief Technology Officer, Woody Davis, started last month, we have started assembling a professional and advanced team of IT professionals with the hiring of 2 project managers, a business analyst, 2 application developers, and an enterprise architect so that we can create a foundation of strong internal IT capacity to handle our major IT project deployments. We've initiated much-needed internal IT governance structures to make certain that all technology we acquire is done so strategically and with the understanding that it must work together with all current and future technology purchases. Improved our mapping capability to provide more data for CompStat analysis, and completed the initial draft of the technology roadmap. To prepare for the implementation of a new RMS system, we have initiated critical data cleaning for all of the various legacy databases that will need to convert over to the RMS system. Over the next 30 to 60 days, we're on track to do the following: to complete the assessment of the records management system vendors, complete the deployment of license plate reader technology, continued deployment of e-tix systems, complete a pilot of upgraded body cam video, continue workforce management system development. We begin a detailed technical assessment of our current infrastructure needs and continue to support the city's ERP Workday initiative. To give you a sense of where we are with technology, we have 25 active IT projects that align with our efforts to, number one, modernize operations, comply with the consent decree, improve processes, and directly support policing. Of that number, 14 of the projects support compliance with the consent decree. 4 projects are new and are in the requirements gathering phase. 9 projects are in the planning phase, which means we are developing schedules and aligning resources, and 11 projects are in progress, which means we've completed appropriate planning and the projects are underway. What you see now is an example of a quad chart management tool that tracks each of our projects recently created by our new Chief Technology Officer. So over the next month, we will continue to implement and fine-tune various controls to continue demonstrating a responsible use of the taxpayer dollar for our efforts. And at the end of this section, we will have an update on our telephone reporting and online reporting for your review. Again, I want to thank the council for your time and attention, and my team and I are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. First question deals with overtime. There's been what I will call false rumors in the media about you receiving overtime pay, and I'd like for you to address that, please.
Absolutely, 100% unequivocally false. I am an exempt salary employee. From the day I was hired, I have been and will always continue to be a salary employee who does not, have not, and will never receive overtime. Every member of the department who is at the rank of captain and above through the commissioner is an exempt salary employee, has not, will not, and will never receive overtime. And so that apparently was some level of a reporting error and just got repeated and repeated and repeated.
Okay. And Deputy Commissioner Gillis, can you talk a little bit more about what that reporting error is and what we're doing to correct that, or if that has been corrected already?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Gillis on behalf of the BPD. The error has been corrected, and it's simply, I'm not very tech savvy or computer savvy, but it simply was some extraction out of spreadsheets and not taking out people who are exempt salaried employees. And I can produce a corrected report if that would benefit the committee.
Yeah, for the sake of transparency, is that something you could get us by call of business tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Well,
if you could,
Mr. Chairman, by close of business tomorrow or call of business tomorrow?
COB.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. President.
Thank you for Mr. Commissioner, and thank you for being here. I want to talk about overtime for a second. So looking at the paper ending on 10/26/19, my gut tells me that big chunk of overtime is related to the marathon, correct?
Marathon and the Light City.
And Light City.
Events, yes.
So my follow-up to that is because, as you know, I think that putting controls in overtime and making sure that we're using overtime in a respectful manner, making sure that we're meeting our goals and our constants that we have for patrol and meeting the special events needs is important for the city, but also making sure that we're being frugal and responsible with taxpayer dollars is important. Do you think it would behoove us, when we know that certain events are coming every year, for those pay periods to say that we know that this amount is going to increase by this much for this pay period, so it doesn't look so, because to the average citizen, when they see that, they're just going to see this big jump and this big gap, and they're not going to know why. But we know that every year, right, there's going to be a big jump for that. There's going to be a big jump when you have, when at that time frame when both Orioles and Ravens are playing at the same time, you're going to see special events, overtime increase. Have you guys thought about putting that in place so that we can, in the spirit of transparency, but also in the spirit of showing people what actually happens if we know that this kind of money is going to be spent every year? Because everyone in Baltimore whose street is not blocked off for half the day loves the Baltimore Marathon, right? No, everyone loves Light City and know that we need to have a public safety presence at these events. But I think it would be great if we were able to communicate that in a different way.
We do that, and we agree with that. And amongst our team, we forecast what the expenditures would be with upcoming events based on the staffing model from the previous event. And so things that we take into account, like the full deployment, if the event was fully staffed and weather permitting, that didn't cancel the event or diminish the event, we can kind of forecast based on this year what next year's event will be if it is fully staffed. And then we take into account any pay metrics that might affect next year that are different from this year. And so we try to at all times forecast what that will cost.
And Mr. President, if I could add to that, we have been working with the mayor's office and with BBMR, preparing for exactly what you're asking for next year. And for example, to your point exactly, New Year's Eve we know is going to be a big commitment of resources on that evening, so we know that there is going to be a reflection in the pay period that encompasses New Year's Eve. But publishing that list of special events, for example, that we know are already scheduled, we want people to come to them in the first place, so it's another avenue of communicating that out, but also to your point of transparency about of what the resource commitment will be and the cost associated with it. We are in process of doing that right now.
Yes, and again, Eric Melanson, Chief of Staff for BPD. The other piece is the red line projection that you see against that report. That 1.65 million, the design of that is to accommodate the pay periods for when it will quite possibly go over that line, but for us making sure we stay under that line so that we can accommodate the periods where we know we're going to spike due to special events. Our goal is to create that as the benchmark for us to keep it so that as many pay periods as we can keep under the line help us pay for the times we have to go over the line.
Thank you. And if you, Commissioner, Chief, and Deputy, if y'all could share as much of that information with the committee as possible so that the council is informed, that they know, that would be a great help, because when they get asked questions about why overtime jumped in this period, then they can say, like, they can't just, they'll know that it's for the marathon, but they can actually point to something that they can share publicly that says, look, we're going to see this bump every year because we have this big special event each and every year.
Absolutely, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, while we're there, looking at the next pay period, because we have been seeing a downward trend, and we'll just set aside the marathon one. Can you talk about two things? Talk about why the little bump was for the pay period ending in the 9th, and then also you mentioned tracking the overtime at the district level. Can you walk us through, if you guys have that information, walk us through district by district and tell us, what districts are at or below the target that you have set for them?
We look at that every Thursday in CompStat, and we put that on the wall and challenge each commander to explain why they went over, if they went over. But most of them have been staying under. And I think in the most recent CompStat week, and I'll let maybe the Chief of Staff or my Chief of Operations be able to talk to you about that, because that is something we track. And we give each district and each division a budget to stay under with clear goals and objectives to meet.
Mr. President, I can speak on it very briefly. I don't have the actual allocations in front of me here today, but what we do in CompStat is look at all the different districts and divisions, both CID and patrol. They each have an allotment, essentially a bank of hours that they can use that doesn't exceed the red line. So the total of the agency doesn't exceed the red line, and we're different. What we're trying to do, and which we are doing in CompStat, is utilizing crime data, overlaying it time of day, days of week, to see where there's spikes in crime, and then offering overtime opportunities there for crime suppression or operational need that exists there. And so where there is less of a need in different districts, the deputy or the chief of patrol or the chief of detectives can reallocate hours to different divisions or districts based on need, so they can move it around essentially. But the goal is always to stay below that red line agency-wide.
I'm just checking, Commissioner. It looks like the gentlemen are trying to file it. If you guys are having internet problems, you're not
I
the
think there's some
only one.
technical difficulties, but we have a digital dashboard that we can look and see where every single district is every single pay period. I think we have one pay period. I just don't know if it's the pay period you're talking about.
Well, it doesn't, I mean, I'm looking for.
We can get the information to
Yeah,
you.
if you don't have it, and just make sure that moving forward, we can add that to the slide, just make sure that we can see
We will
per
ab-
district, which,
We will absolutely have that.
And part of, just so you know, sir, there's different categories of overtime that we're tracking. And the one that we're trying to make certain of we're getting a lot of visibility on are the categories we're considering to be voluntary overtime, not the involuntary overtime, for instance,
Filling a
appearances in
shift.
court or, investigations that have to continue as scenes are being cleared. These are things that you don't want to just pull a person off because it's the end of their shift.
Right.
So what we're trying to identify is the discretionary OT that is at the command level's, ability to determine whether it's needed or not. And those are the targets for which it's appropriate to hold our command staff accountable to. And that's what we can provide to you. So.
and, Mr. Chair, my last question for the first round of questions. So let's see, in the technology portion, Mr. Commissioner, something that you know is very near and dear to my heart, we talk about the next 30 to 60 days and complete the deployment of license plate reader technology. Can you walk us through that as much as possible without giving out locations or anything like that, what that would mean? Because as you know, I think that we need 30 or 40 more, and every shift in every district should have at least 2 on their main corridors all day, every day.
Absolutely. I'm going to let my Chief Technology Officer answer that for us.
Woody Davis, Chief Technology Officer. So over the next 30 days, the license plate reader is on fixed sites, not vehicle mounted. And so we've identified 15 locations. Of the 15 locations, we've surveyed, we're targeting 15. We've actually surveyed 16 because we found one of the locations to be not optimal for an LPR. So between now and the first of the year, we would have surveyed these locations and deployed the 15 systems and connected them to our infrastructure so they can be fully operational.
So a follow-up question. Can someone tell, why are we not using the ones on cars versus the fixed one?
We use the ones on cars.
I mean, but in this rollout, why are we not increasing those versus the fixed ones?
As I understand, the fixed ones is really the scope of this specific project. We're not stopping here. We're going to continue beyond this. But this is the equipment we had at the time. To make sure that we do it well and do it right, we were focused on this, in this case, fixed sites. As we begin deploying more LPRs, we will be in a better position to communicate, our future plans for continued deployment.
So, Mr. Commissioner, was this a decision that was made before you got here to move with the rest of these?
I believe that was the scope of it, and the funding for it, I believe, was before we got here, and it was already in motion.
Okay, so for your standpoint, which ones would you find to be more effective? Because for me, I think any of them are fine, but for me, I want them attached to cars that have cops in them that can immediately act on the intelligence and information given to them.
I think they both work very well.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are fixed, that are in optimum locations do very well. The ones that are in cars do well also. But when the cars go down for maintenance,
right.
and they do quite frequently, then they're out of service for longer periods. And so that becomes a balance of which one is in service for longer. And the ones that are on cars, quite honestly, go down pretty frequently.
So, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that Deputy Chief is here. So, Deputy Chief, before you were in your position, we had this conversation when we were trying to coordinate agencies. So, this, I think, is a conversation that has to be had with DGS. If we have to be able to have them prioritize cars that we know we need for equipment reasons. So they can't hold on to a LPR car for the same time they will hold on to a regular patrol car, because the LPR car, there's no one-to-one trade-off, right? They have to try to get that car back out on the street faster than they would a regular patrol car, because the next car is not going to have a LPR on it, right? We have to make sure that DGS and fleet maintenance understand that, so that we can keep these cars on the street as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner, on the 5th slide, the FY '20 year-to-date overtime hours. The numbers in beige or yellow, whatever that is, it says OT historical edits entered in pay period. Is that just based on last year? Or is that over what year
I think
period?
that's based on just previous pay cycles, not necessarily last year, but.
That's correct. A historical edit means that they worked at a different time, and then the time wasn't calculated into the pay period until a later date. So a historical edit would be, for example, you worked sometime this summer, but you didn't submit your overtime slip until this fall. It gets calculated into the fall, so that is an historical edit.
Why is that happening? Why aren't officers submitting their overtime slips before the end of the pay period?
So I can answer that. Part of the police commissioner's policy change, Police Commissioner Memorandum 02 of this year addressed that exact issue. We were seeing a really large amount of historical edits, which means that we can't tell in real time how much money we're spending. That's a problem, obviously, for managing the agency and managing the budget. And so in order to address it, the commissioner added language in there that required officers to submit their overtime, voluntary overtime slips to their payroll clerk before their next regularly scheduled tour of duty, which means that essentially before the next shift. And so that means that payroll clerks are getting them immediately and are inputting them as quickly as possible. Before, there was not such a regulation. It didn't exist before the commissioner dictated that happens, essentially. Of course, there are situations where it's impossible to turn in the paperwork immediately because you might be going on a scheduled vacation the next day, so there are historical edits still. And then the bigger issue that exists that we were just talking about is technology. This is all paper-based still, and so officers are filling out the overtime request, essentially, and then there are hours that they're working on paper, submitting them on paper, and so the payroll clerks are collecting a stack of papers and going through and doing data entry, essentially. So it's been addressed, but we also can tighten it up by improved technology.
So when do we project that's going to be resolved? Because when I look at the next slide, this pay period ending November 9th, we had nearly 3,000 hours of overtime that was from previous pay periods.
And again,
Right? So that means that
yes.
those officers, well, it's not the officer's fault. Theoretically, it took over 14 days to get that information submitted.
There are some cases, because it's a paper system, there are some cases where the officer is now, according to the new policy, required, as the Deputy Commissioner said, required to turn the pay slip in before the next scheduled tour of duty. But if the officer's next scheduled tour of duty is several days later, then we run into the issue of, does the payroll clerk even work on that day? And then, so we're working through both of those dynamics, and there are times where it could be a prolonged period, not very long, but a prolonged period where either the officer is not due back or the payroll clerk is not in, and then it gets entered into the next cycle. It shows up in the next cycle.
And Mr. Chairman, to answer your one question about when will we have a technological solution, the citywide Workday ERP project, which is, you could probably speak better to it, deals specifically with payroll and scheduling. And so that it will automate all of this stuff and make it electronic and happen immediately as the work is being done, or completed, I should say. And that is expected to be completed, I think, next fall.
Okay. So theoretically, the officers are following the policy that you've put in place. I guess my next question is there a backlog of these paper slips that need to be entered into our existing payroll system, or is it more of the multiple scenarios that you
I don't believe it's a backlog. The Deputy Commissioner can speak more specifically. I don't think it's a backlog for a protracted period of time, but I do think there's a backlog from pay period to pay period. So coming out of a pay period, going into another pay period, when the officer is not getting in the slip the very next day, and or the clerk is not available the very next day, and the pay period shifts, the historical edits show up in the next pay period. And so while there may not be any that we believe are from months ago, there are always going to be some from the previous pay cycle.
Right, so, Mr. Chairman, so if a person works on Saturday and they have an OT slip and they go into their shift on Sunday, but the clerk isn't there on Sunday, or let's say even Monday because they're off that day or they're sick, payroll locks essentially either Monday or Tuesday morning. And so Tuesday comes around, they're not able to put it into the prior pay period that Saturday when it was worked. So there's always going to be this residual that carries over. So we believe that the large sum of that historical edit is actually from the immediate prior pay period. But the concern that you have, and I think we have as well, is the longer standing slips that have historically been held back. And that's where the policy now is in place, that we want to make certain that folks are submitting it as timely as possible, not just so that they get paid, but that we can realize what those costs are as close to the payroll period as possible. So you see a jump in the historical edits from this pay period compared to the previous one, which had Light City and had the marathon in
A
it.
lot of those were.
We believe that a large sum of those historical edits might be related to the special event work that happened during those periods. So that's why we would kind of see that number jump in correspondence with that, because my understanding is Light City bled through a payroll period and began to the next one. And so these are the kinds of things we're working out to.
No, I understand. That's helpful. I think I get it. So when that policy was put in place, is there a shot clock or a deadline, whereas, after this date, you cannot submit these paper overtime slips from X number of months ago or something of that sort?
No, well, there is no blackout date essentially or anything like that. If someone worked, we're going to pay them, and we're required to do that under federal law. And so any work that has been performed, whether it is a long time ago, if folks can show that they did the work, they're going to be compensated for it.
Do we know?
I think the bigger issue is what do we do when we find that there are human errors where people neglected to turn them in late or neglected to input them in late. We're required to pay the people. I think we have a concern of what do we do with that? How do we train people to do it right, and how do we hold people accountable to make sure it gets done according to the timeline?
Yeah, and I can understand, for example, with Light City, there's a larger cost associated with these overtime historical edits that came in, and that narrative helps explain the story there. I'm just wondering how much of this is out there that we don't know about. And
Well, to the commissioner's point, and I probably what Chief Melanson is about to say the same thing is, with this policy comes training is coupled with it, as well as punitive measures if you violate the policy. That is essentially the mechanism to get people to comply with the policy going forward. And so obviously I think the commissioner is right, and based on the data that we have right now, it would appear that the majority of all of the historical edits are from the previous pay period. Most of that is attributable to scheduling, frankly, and just having the right people meet each other at the right time to drop off this slip, and to what Eric was saying about being able to go into the system and enter it, because there are lockout dates during the pay period that you can't enter data. But the policy itself carries with it mechanisms to get people to comply with it.
got it.
And that is being utilized.
Thank you. Next question on the attrition for year-to-date for 2019. Can you explain the narrative as to why attrition is lower? I mean, that's fantastic. What's the storyline there?
We do exit surveys, and there are some who are, most of whom leave because they are retiring and they are at the retirement age. There are some who are separated in the probationary phase who do things that don't measure up to our standards for one reason or another. But the majority are at the retirement phase. We see the lowest year in perhaps the last 6 years. And it has been pretty steady across the past 10 years. But this year has been the lowest, which is a good thing, which is a good retention thing. And we want to make sure that we invest in our employees, improve our facilities, improve our technology, improve our equipment and pay, so that we can retain the good people who work here for us. We don't always have the answers. What we can say is that it is not factual that people are leaving to go to lateral jobs in other police departments. The majority of the departures are retirement separations.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to what we're doing right now that we weren't doing before, in addition to you being on board and having
I
a new
think
senior
people
team.
are feeling better about the Baltimore Police Department and rethinking their longevity and their options, and perhaps they see a brighter day for the Baltimore Police Department. I'm certainly optimistic.
Yeah, I just, when I look at, we have 200, I think we have a little over 200 sworn vacancies. If we can maintain this over a 3-year period, that cuts our sworn vacancies on half. And then you couple that with what you're doing in recruiting, we're able to close that gap a lot quicker.
It is a combination of both recruiting and retention that we close that gap to fill the 200-plus positions that are vacant.
And before I jump to the council president, one last thing on this. Are there any plans to actively collect data in the near future to help provide background on why this is happening? Because this is obviously a good thing. So whatever it is that you're doing now is working.
We collect data through exit surveys and
But not necessarily exit surveys, because those people are leaving. I guess the question is, how do we get to the 3 people per month that are making the active decision to stay with the department, and why are they making that decision? I don't expect you to have an answer to that. I'm just curious.
I think both exits and people who choose to stay. Through our consent decree efforts, we are always, through focus groups, learning about why some of these decisions are made. But certainly, we could be more formal and include internal satisfaction surveys within our department.
Just curious,
Absolutely.
not asking you to do that. I just encourage you to think about it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Commissioner, really quickly, when you talk about the separations and like the average, because we know this information because we've been hearing about it, and it really hasn't changed even before 2013. But a lot of people in the public seem to think that more people are leaving now more than ever, when that number really hasn't changed that much. Even now, us being lower than 2014 is a very key indicator. Have you guys thought about how you're going to talk about that publicly? And then to go back to the point about the 200 vacancies, and not just a recruitment strategy, can you also talk about how you think that having new leadership with a new vision, a recruitment strategy, figuring out how to make the workplace better, also adding in civilianization, how that will help to us reducing that number consistently over time?
Thank you for that. And it is both the strategy of recruiting and retention and crime fighting and crime reduction, but it's also the communication strategy. And everywhere I go, every community meeting that I attend, that many of you are there, you hear me talk about how we communicate to the public what our attrition numbers are, what our recruitment numbers are, and how those efforts are going. And we want to make sure that there are good strategies to make sure we can retain the good people who are here. But we also want to make sure that like I said earlier, we improve on our facilities, we improve in technology, we improve in the human capacity that we have, and then we tell the story about what we're doing in a very robust way that not only you, our elected officials, know, but the members of the community actually knows the work that's going day to day. And there is a false narrative that people are perpetuating, that people are leaving this department in large numbers, and it is just not true. The numbers are there. The people are here. Fewer people are leaving than's reported, and there's a time when the department was budgeted for 3,000 or more police officers. We haven't been budgeted for that for quite some time. We're budgeted for 2661, so the number of vacancies is slightly over 200. And with our recruitment and retention efforts, we're certainly working to closing that gap as fast as we can.
Councilman Pinkett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. My first question is kind of similar to what Chairman Costello and Council President also asked. So I want to say, congratulations on as it relates to the reduction in attrition. But can you also speak to, it seems like in addition, we've had less sworn hires also during that time frame. Can you speak to our efforts as it relates to hiring and how we can boost that number to really take advantage of the reduction in attrition?
We have a very renewed and very strong focus on recruitment. We have a robust recruitment campaign. to attract more people, but that's a 120 to 50 to 180-day process to get people from application to hire. So we have not yet seen the manifestation of those efforts. We just launched it late June, early July.
Okay.
We have not yet seen the manifestation into hires yet. We think late December, early January, we saw an exponential increase in applications, but that has not yet translated into hires. We believe that will happen late this year, early into the new year. But it is a very robust process. It is extremely competitive, and we are competing with all the police departments across the country who are dealing with the very same thing. And I would say that we would like your help, because there's one thing that is a legislative thing that is hurting us but helping some others. There is a 3-year disqualification thing for the use of marijuana. And across the country, it is only 2 years. As a matter of fact, for federal employees, it is only 2 years. That is one thing that could potentially help us. Because even to be one of a federal agents, the requirement of recent use is beyond it's only the 2-year mark. But we are stricter than that, requiring 3 years. So that's one thing, but there is a very robust process, and it is extremely competitive. We want to make sure we have the people who have the right capacity and the right will, the right temperament to be members of the Baltimore Police Department and to be a member of this profession. I would tell you that all police departments are having this very same issue.
Okay, and I'm glad you kind of transitioned to the recruitment and hiring, because also, like you said, the numbers have gone up exponentially. But it also looks like that based upon the actual hires from the applications, that we're somewhere between maybe 3 and 4% of those applications turning into hires. And then it's about the same for Baltimore City residents. It looks like about 3.5% actually become hires. Can you just talk a little bit about how we go about turning? Well, I mean, it's based upon the applicants, but how do? And you mentioned the marijuana, but what are some other things that potentially we can do to increase that percentage of applicants that are actually turned into hires? And then specifically, is there anything else we can do to target more Baltimore City residents? It looks like it's about 29%.
There's always the ability and the will to enhance our efforts in trying to recruit more people from our area, from our city. That's what the digital marketing campaign is all about, and we hired a consultant group made up of experts who know how to do that work to help us do that. The thing to increase hires is to reduce the amount of people who get disqualified. Mm-hmm. We have to reduce the amount of people who get disqualified, and there are a lot of factors, perhaps not independent, but collectively, that disqualify a number of people. And we want to make sure that people are making it through the background investigation, the psychological investigation, the physical fitness portion, the medical portion. All of those things are big factors, but the background investigation is a huge component. And it disqualifies a large amount of people because of poor work history, because of admitted drug use, because of a number of things, and to some degree, and sometimes criminal activity, and minor and major. So it disqualifies a lot of people, and though we get a lot of applications, it's somewhere between the 2 and 3 and 3.5% application to hire pass rate.
And that's consistent.
That is consistent around the country. We're all competing for the same 2.5%.
If I could, you might have just said this, but it's 2% is the average that make it through. So 3 to 4% is really good. Obviously, we want to increase that, but 2% is the national threshold. Generally, the average from people from application to hire make it all the way through that process.
One of the things that you can really do, and working on recruitment issues for years, the one thing that can really close the gap and get that number up is our ability to quickly get to the applicant, to quickly get to them, quickly get through the process, make sure that we get through the case as expeditiously as possible, and then quickly schedule them for the next stage. And part of what we're doing now is we have a great team of concierges, people who do nothing but consistent outreach with these qualified applicants on a regular basis, sometimes daily, to make sure that they're staying engaged, staying scheduled. The biggest thing that can help us close the gap is continued, persistent engagement. It is like a political campaign. It is like a sales drive. It is like anything else when it comes to customer service related outreach. That's the skill set and the capacity that can create a competitive edge more than anything else, because frankly it is a numbers game, and the difference between 2 to 3 to 4% can be tremendous when it comes to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10,000 applicants that we might get through a online digital board. That's the kind of thought process that we have to look at.
The reason he says that is because the average applicant who applies to be a police officer in their hometown usually applies to 3 to 5 agencies. The applicant who wishes to apply across country applies to upwards of 10 to sometimes 20 agencies around the country. And we're competing with all of them who are all reaching out to them at the same time. So we're working diligently to make sure we stay in contact and engage with our applicants and with cadets who are under the age of 21, who we can bring into a cadet program and groom and cultivate them and bring them into a culture that helps them and prepares them for a police academy. That's another pipeline to our academy.
That's good to hear, because when I talked to the leadership of MTA Police, they attributed how expeditiously somebody could go through their process as being probably the most critical, I guess, aspect of them getting as many hires, is because once they got hold of someone, they took them through as much of the process as possible before they released them to potentially, being wooed by some other.
This is so important to us. It is so important to us that when I got here, we created a comp stat called Recruit Stat simply for the recruiting process. Every single week, we are in a room with brilliant people to look at every step of the process, and we look at barriers, we look at ways to overcome those barriers and obstacles and how to overcome them. Who are the good performers in the recruitment unit? Who needs help? What's the pace of an investigator, the pace of a case, and much of what we're doing really requires on the participation of the applicant. So when we need the applicant to send things to us, but they're sending things to 10 different departments, it becomes a challenge. But we comp stat that process every single week, and we treat it as importantly as we treat the crime fight. And we want the commander and the members of that unit to come in and report out on what they are doing every single week to produce qualified candidates, and to explain to us why we have that number and why we have so many that are disqualified.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. President.
Thank you. Real briefly, Mr. Commissioner, because the councilman asked a question about that. One of the other things I found striking about our applicants and the hirees, so 56% of our applicants are African American, yet only 26% are people that we're hiring, as juxtaposed to 26% of our applicants are white and 47% of them are of our hirees are white. Can we talk about those issues and what we're doing to address that? Because when you talk about a city like Baltimore, those numbers are staggering, and we know that we want to home grow. That's why we're trying to push the cadet program, something that we talk about consistently. But talk about what causes you see in such a big drop and a big difference between those categories.
We see those very same issues, and they are very important to us, and we want to make sure we can reach people who want to be members of this department and help them in every way possible to become members of this department by even having some practice time with the tests and how to, we can give them tips on how to have a successful voyage through the background process. But it really is on the candidate that we have the right candidate with the will, capacity, temperament to be a member of this department. But that's why the marketing, the digital marketing campaign was so important, so we can reach that core demographic of people from Baltimore to attract them to this department, and their testimonies of members from our department to really speak to them, that they would connect with that and want to be members of this department. Those are things we want to overcome, but it really is about looking for the successful candidate who can make it through that process. We saw similar numbers in New Orleans, and I talk to chiefs all the time, and who have sometimes lower numbers of acceptable candidates from their city, and sometimes a larger number of acceptable candidates from a bigger pool from around the country.
So I guess my follow-up to that is that what are the reasons? Is it because is marijuana the leading cause? Is it because of background issues of connections and family members? What are the reasons why so many of our black applicants? Is it because we're using tests that might be culturally biased? What are the reasons why so many of our black candidates aren't making it through?
I think for each candidate, it could be different. Some, it could be the test. For some, it could be the marijuana use, the 3-year versus the 2-year, which could make the difference in some of the percentage. For some, it's background investigations or work employment or a number of things. But we have a lot of interest, but the criteria is such that the criteria is set according to the national best practices, and we want to make sure that we're never lowering our standards, but we're attracting people who can make it through this process.
Mr. President, again, I would reiterate the speed of which we're getting to the qualified applicants. We're possibly losing out on other jurisdictions for the applicants that you're searching for us to pick up. And
You're not getting to
you
them
know,
fast
it goes back to the image of the department, trying to improve that image. While they might apply, they may not stick with the process. And so for us, it's important to focus on that communication strategy, make sure they know where the department is headed, try to encourage them to re-engage in that process. So, you know, just because there's a application and then there's a hiring number, don't forget that there's folks that are just falling out of the process, that they get either disengaged or they pick up with another jurisdiction. And so it's not that we are taking negative action against every single application, but in fact, we see a large number of people who fall out of the process.
So, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. So if you guys could provide to us like the reasons why, just if we can do some digging in so we can see for us, so that we can see what's happening, so that then, you know, I've done that in Annapolis before about lowering the rate. I'll do it again. But if there are other things that we can do, especially here locally, that we can talk about doing that, because I think it's important if we want the city to do that. That, of course, you know, I'm the national best practice standard guy, but I also want the city to have a police department that's reflective of and making sure that we're hiring locally too.
I think we all want that. I want Senator to speak, but we have to remember that we're comparing the pool of candidates from the city to the pool of candidates from around the country. All right.
So, Sunny Schnitzer, Deputy Chief of Staff, Public Safety in the Mayor's Office. Just wanted to respond to that. Actually, in preparation for this hearing, I was talking to the city stat folks in the I team this morning, highlighted this, and I think in an upcoming recruit stat, they're going to be doing a deep dive on that, and we'll of course, you know, be happy to kind of report out to the council on that.
Yep, as soon as we get that information, please give it over to us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, to you and your team for coming out today. So the council president asked sort of the first part of my question, because I was wondering the exact same thing, and I would just second that. I think the other piece that stood out to me is the number of women applicants at 25% versus 13% hired, and just in the city that's largely African American and women, it's important that we, you know, clearly we have some next steps, but just want to reiterate that point that my hope is that the department reflects the population, especially when we talk about the ability to build trust. Often we trust people who look like us, who come from where we come from. And so I'll leave that there, because you've largely been answered. The other thing that wanted more information on is the civilian vacancies and what are we doing to fill. There's 58 remaining, which obviously reflects a lot of progress from where we were a year ago, and historically have been. Can you talk a little bit about strategies used to fill that, and I guess a timeline of which we think we'll have all 58 in it fully staffed?
We report on that every single Monday, and we talk about that, and I make our Director of Human Resources talk about where we are in the hiring process with hiring people, identifying people, and people who are in background investigations. I'll let Deputy Commissioner Jim Gillis talk about that.
I think the number is actually 62 was the original number for civilianization, and of those 62, which became budgeted positions after July 1 fiscal year started, there are 27 that have been filled. 5 are in backgrounds, which is the last step prior to screening them in or out to being hired. 6 are pretty much the ones that are outstanding, and 24 are being actively interviewed for right now. So it's really 6 that are sort of outstanding out there. One thing that I will, to talk about what strategies are we employing to try to fill positions, civilian positions. Obviously, civilianization / professionalization is fundamental to our upstaffing in operations, and upstaffing in operations is fundamental to reducing crime. Part of that is looking at how we work with our partner city agencies in filling civilian positions. We work through DHR. DHR is the agency charged for the entire city with hiring civilians into civilian positions citywide. Sometimes, when you post for a position out there, you're posting, it's more generic than it is just for the police department. It's for the entire city, and it could fulfill a classification that could be DPW or the BPD. And so working with them to try to sort of focus more on the BPD postings so that people who are actually looking for jobs in law enforcement as a civilian are able to find them, because right now it's a little bit more difficult. And also expanding our scope in terms of the platforms that we post job opportunities on, and growing that a little bit to expand the pool of people to reach into to apply.
Okay. And I guess, and if any way we can be helpful with that, I think it's important because we know that we need more officers on the street. This is obviously an area that's been identified by both this body, the mayor's office, and the department as being a priority moving forward. And so kudos on definitely making a tremendous amount of progress here.
You did mention something. You didn't really ask a question. I know it was a statement about the female police officers. And so we do have, we have identified that there are some issues sometimes with the physical agility exam, and some of the females do not pass at the same rate the males pass the physical agility exam. So we have developed a remediation boot camp to assist females in developing the strength to progress so that they can come back and retake that physical agility, so that they're not just disqualified because of their inability to pass the physical agility exam, but we can remediate them and bring them back on, let them retake it. And those are some of the efforts that we're doing to make sure we not disqualify, but bring on as many females as who are qualified to become police officers.
And just to clarify, that's available to all applicants, but we've identified the issue because of exactly what you're talking about. So we think it's a strategy. It's one of the stages in the process that we found that we're trying to make sure we're overcoming. And again, it's a thing that's existing throughout many jurisdictions, not just us, that physical agility requirement can be more difficult for female applicants. So by giving them that extra support, which we've got a really great program now to identify that, and that's something that the I team was really helpful with putting together as well. So just that collaborative effort that we're able to kind of all look at every stage and see what we can do to get more qualified applicants through the process.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question, Mr. Chair. Thank you for adding additional metrics on the online reporting. I know that's something that the council president has been talking about for years now. And I think it would be helpful for the next hearing to see sort of where the increases are year to date, but having this is helpful for today's purposes for sure. I did have some questions about a few items. So it looks like 67% of the destruction of property reports were rejected, 36% larceny, and just a 30% overall rejection rate for online reporting, which is good that 70% are going through. What are we doing to both, and I think we've talked about this before, continuing to market the online reporting and encouraging it, but also is there a outreach or education component to the constituents who are rejected to help either fix their applications or not applications, their reports, or to help them build better report? I mean, what are we doing to make sure that we get that number even lower than what it is?
So part of it is an educational issue. You're right. That's part of something that we need to strategize on and be able to market, as we move forward. But a lot of the times, it's a call that comes in through the online reporting or through the phone reporting that there's just not sufficient follow-up in a 30-day time period. And so what's happening is you're seeing a lot of closures based on the lapse of communication back and forth from the citizens. So that's a great deal, at least, in our experience so far of the program, where there's an initial call and they reach out and there's additional requirements to be able to create and close the report. But the follow-up from our officers is either met with no response or a lack of response either by email or by phone when our officers try to reach back to that constituent. So after a certain point, the case gets closed, and so it gets rejected, as you see in the numbers here. So that's a portion of that. But the rest of it is, again, folks who are calling into something. There are possibilities that a report that is submitted under one of these pieces might end up being, in fact, requiring an officer presence, right? So it's an over or underutilization of the program where, in fact, a real response is needed. That would result in a rejection as well. So not all rejections are created equal. And so that's something we can kind of do better on with reporting out on this. But again, it shows the importance of us being able to educate what the program is used for. We have a lot of information online as you go through that shows like a descriptive a detail of what these calls are for and how the system is used. But as far as marketing out the effort, that's something that we are looking at, building into our narrative as we go forward with community outreach programs and everything else. So that's something that's important to us. But again, not every rejection is us saying, no, you can't have help. It's they did not provide follow-up. Maybe it's a better utilization of resources to send out an officer and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Schleifer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because we were talking about some recruitment numbers and stuff, I was curious if we have all the classes set for, all the dates set for 2020, and if so, how many classes do we currently have for 2020?
The dates are set for 2020. I don't recall off the top of my head how many classes there are for the entirety of the year. I do know that we are condensing the classes, meaning they are shortening the duration that people go through the academy, which allows us to produce more officers more quickly, meaning you graduate more people more often. And so I will get that information on how many classes unless someone else knows
the goal is to have 6 classes, and the police academy command staff, they are developing what's called a master training plan, which is similar to a college course catalog, which catalogs all the courses in the training, when the training starts, when it ends, throughout the course of a year, so we can systematically know the start and end date of every class to put 6 classes in a year.
Okay, and so for those classes, what was the minimum time that it has to take in order to get through everything? Because I know some of the classes in previous years would run at all different times.
So it is currently somewhere around 36 weeks and can go longer. We found some opportunities to shrink some of that by being more expedient with the instructions, making sure that instructors are there with a backup instructor so that there are never blocks where there's no instructor and the officers are on protracted breaks and long breaks without an instructor. So the master training plan calls for there to be a full day of instruction, and we're shrinking it from 36 weeks to 30 weeks to start that program in January. With that 30-week academy class, the plan is to bring 6 classes into the academy a year, and with precise start and finish dates, so that as we recruit and as we bring people in who have to either leave other employments and or move into the area to join our academy, those are things that are very important to people to know when they make life decisions to leave an employment or another city and come here and be a member of our police department.
Okay, and the last question on that, so comparing to the current location versus the new location that you guys are moving into, what is the capacity difference between how many people can actually go through the academy in a calendar year?
We have the capacity, well, we will have the capacity to bring in as many people as we like once we outfit it to do all the things we wanted to do. As it stands right now, with no retrofit, we have the same capacity, if not more capacity, than we have now, because the classrooms that are at University of Baltimore, 2 of the classrooms are 50-person capacity, the other 3 are 75-person capacity. And there is the capacity to build multiple other classrooms with 100-person capacity. So we will have the capacity to even enhance not just class frequency, but class size, which is another goal of ours.
And do we have a move date yet?
Tentatively, if everything goes according to plan, which I guess that's what tentatively means, we're looking at mid-January.
And so are there going to be current classes in progress that are going to be moving, or is it timed for new classes starting to start at the new place?
Classes will be in session, and there will be a short time to just move, but we hope that there's minimal interruption in instruction. And the reason we chose this date is because with the master training plan that lays out the courses from day 1 to the last day, we found it to be able to deploy that strategy starting in January. But if we started it prior to January in this year, it would not allow us to do the 6 classes in a year. And so we thought it'd be best to just start it in the new year.
And we see the trainees, as part of their program, engage with the community and go to different programs. Are they going to be the ones actually physically moving stuff, or are they separate from that?
All of the above.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Councilwoman McCray?
So I just wanted to double back on Councilman Burnett's question. The online reporting system is a clear cost savings item for us, and you did briefly touch upon it. When we got a little bit of, say, over 23% rejections, can you just give me a little bit more information about why they're being kicked back? You touched upon it briefly.
So when an online report is submitted and they go through the process of providing information to the system, there are requirements for certain pieces of information to make sure that the officer has enough to be able to write the report and be able to submit it. It's a lot of what I'm talking about when it comes to insufficient information coming back to the officer is the input that's coming from the resident or from the citizen using the app. And so what there is there's a follow-up process whereby the officer uses the same system to, email the individual to make sure that if there's some kind of supplemental information that's required to create the report. And what's happening in large cases is there's a failure to respond on the part of the citizen, and after 30 days, the request is closed. Otherwise, keeping it open indefinitely becomes a question of, how much do we need to follow up? And there's multiple instances where they follow up. The same is true for telephone reporting. There might be an initial, call in to the telephone reporting line or a follow-up that is required, and if the citizen is able to give the information or the resident is able to give the information, then they can close the case and move on. But if there's additional follow-up that's required and there's not information provided by the person who initiated the complaint, after a period of time, they would close and, in this case, reject the report. So that's a large quantity. Again, we can split this out for you. We can figure out what that universe looks like.
So I asked that question because one thing, Commissioner, that you said is that you needed us to help you
Yes.
engage residents about the online reporting system, and I'm consistently pushing my residents to the system. So when I see this is a 23% rejection rate, it just concerns me.
Sure.
How far are you? You spoke briefly about the marketing material. How far are you on the marketing for the system?
So that's something we're looking to make part of our January launch. There's a lot of initiatives that we're trying to push forward on right now, but as far as our technology program is concerned, we want to make sure we have the resources available so that we can then, follow up on those reports. The biggest thing is making sure we have enough manpower available in the department to be able to respond. We use a lot of limited duty folks for this activity. This isn't really something we use full-time personnel for, because it begins to, question whether or not that full-time body could be doing something a little bit more productive on the street. So it is something we use a lot of limited duty personnel for. So we are looking at, again, adding civilians to this component, making sure it's fully staffed so that we have the capacity we need prior to us doing a full launch, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we fully market and fully launch until we have that capacity built up. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to respond expeditiously enough to these, citizen calls that are using the app, if that makes sense. So our goal is to try to make that part of our January marketing push. Okay. So.
Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chief, you know that Cop Logic is literally my baby, so it's something that's near and dear to me. But for me, as you know, I always wanted to see how we can get more there. So, and I know that we're going to be doing the campaign, but also I want to know, we didn't put it in the slide this month. I want to see the comparison. Also, how many TRU reports that we've taken this year, because I think if we combine the number, that will give us a better sense, if someone can get that information before we leave, a better sense of where we are in all alternative reporting. But even based off the sheer numbers, for example, let's see, we've already had over 5,000 larceny from autos, and we only took 529 reports on Cop Logic, right? I think that we all know that we can get that number up a lot. I know that, for example, when Mr. Smullian and I were first looking into this program, that Charlotte was taking 10,000 reports a year online, and that was a long time ago. And we know what that would equate into total man hours saved, and we know we need man hours for patrol more than anything else in the city of Baltimore, so that we can have them focus on the things that we need. And of course, we need cost savings too. So my question is, how do we have a goal for how many reports that we want to see combined online and over the phone? And also for you, Mr. Sinema, when they see these cost savings, are they allowed to then use that cost savings for things like LPRs and other things that the department needs?
I think the answer to the question is every call that does not require a personal police response can be either online, web-based reporting, and or telephone reporting for those who perhaps can't do it or don't have the internet or the skill set, a combination of both. We think that number is somewhere between 15 and 20%.
15 to 20%.
Between 15 and 20%.
Of the
total
1.2 million calls that we get a year.
Yeah, I think it's like of all reports, which it's mainly property and nonviolent crime, but it's somewhere between 15 and 20%.
And do we know how many reports a year that we do roughly? Because I was thinking calls for service, so I was thinking like 1.2 million.
It's not the calls for service, because every call is not for a report.
Right.
But for the actual property crimes and or crimes that are reported that require a report, that number is somewhere around 15 to 20% of all calls, and we can get you the exact number of calls.
Yep, and then because my follow-up, Commissioner, is that what do you need from us to put that in place as a policy right now? Because I think that if we put that in it's going to be culture shock. People are going to be mad. They can be mad at me. But I think that once they understand that that's going to mean that their patrol officers are going to actually have time to patrol and build relationships and talk to people and be in businesses and focus on people that are doing robberies and have robbery initiatives and all those things, then they will understand that. What do you need to put that in place to make that the policy for the police department?
Very good question. On the front end is certainly capacity on our part. Because though it is a web-based system, it still requires manpower on our end to process it all. And then the improvement to the technology infrastructure. Getting the records management system will greatly enhance our ability to do this correctly and then audit the system. And right now, it's still, though it's a web-based system, there's still a lot of human input to do a lot of the work, even though it's supposed to be a web-based system. And so the capacity enhancement on our part, and then certainly, creating the policy on how to do it, I think is easy, but the communications strategy between all of the council districts will be a very important thing on how we together can educate the community on how to do this and what it means to ask for a police officer response that doesn't really require a police response. It will be a culture shock, but I think together we can accomplish that.
Yep, and I think, Commissioner, for a follow-up for Director Bloodworth is for you to send to us and to me, to the committee, an outline of the timeline and the needs for that so that we can help you meet those needs so that we can get this done as quickly as humanly possible.
Yes, sir.
Councilwoman Sneed.
Just curious, when you talked about payroll and it's still paper instead of digital, have we looked in to see how much it would cost for all of that to be digital?
Yes, we have.
The citywide is moving to a digital system, Workday, ERP. It's supposed to go, I think the pilot is with like 9 of the city agencies. BPD is one of them, and it's supposed to go live in the fall of 2020. So I don't know the costs associated with it. Maybe Mr. Senemy could speak to it, but that is already happening. We have dedicated personnel just to this project, as the other city agencies have as well.
Yeah, so to echo what Jim said, yeah, project is underway. I can get you a specific cost. The cost is in the tens of millions of dollars. We have selected a vendor. There's multiple phases to the project. So the first is payroll and human capital management, and then there's other phases further down in terms of finance systems and other tertiary systems that touch those systems. We can give you the total project cost, but it's over a number of years, the implementation, and it's tens of millions of dollars.
And if it goes to, or when it goes to digital, will jobs be eliminated? Will somebody be cut out the picture because we will no longer be?
So potentially yes, and that's the idea, or the job would be eliminated, but in some cases that person can be moved to another function is what our hope would be. But with technology projects like this, one of the expectations is that there should be savings in terms of people that are doing manual work today, that they can be redirected to other places. Generally, when we've had these big kind of what I would say efficiency type projects, we've generally saved the money through attrition, where there might be people that are just ready to retire and then we can abolish the position. Or if they're earlier in the career and they have some kind of skill set that can be used somewhere else, they can be put to better use rather than doing this manual type of work. So that is the expectation of the project, that there are net savings on a recurring basis, but I'll have to give you the specifics about what the total cost is and what that should be.
And if I could just weigh in here, one kind of analysis that happened this summer was looking through, to your point, Councilwoman, the different positions, right? We know that timekeeping, for example, is a specific task of individual staff. It's often not a person's sole job duty for timekeeping. So we're in the process now of looking at, there is no shortage of work that can happen in the city, so we're looking through to identify what are other tasks that can align with those positions and with those job classifications, so that there is minimal, if any, loss of positions, and we're able to kind of realign those positions within their classification to fit within the ERP process and to help us address some of the other needs of the city.
And I would just echo that from the BPD. The civilian workforce at the BPD is an invaluable part of the agency. We talk so much about professionalization and civilianization, and just as Ms. Schnitzer just said, payroll is just one small part of what they do, and there is a tremendous amount of work to be done when it comes to the internal workings of the police department. And the goal is to free up these men and women in the uniform and the folks who are out on the streets right now in the uniform, so that they can be focusing on being out in the street and being with the community and making the city safe. And we have a great workforce of civilians who will be able to allow them to do that even more, and with Workday and with ERP and with the technology advancements.
Perfect. My second question, I want to go back to you, Commissioner, when you mentioned of getting the right people in, making sure they're mentally ready, physically ready, and going through all the tests. Once you're in the police department, do we do another mental test to just make sure that you're okay, or is there a red flag or something that has to happen for us to do a check?
There are times when, either by self-reporting or by supervisory referral, people are allowed and are sent to have a psychological exam by the city contracted psychologist. So yes, there are times where there are incidents that happen and are observations made where it is mandated or referred that we refer people to have that done. And sometimes people self-report and are allowed to go on their own.
So if you don't self-report, is there additional cost or anything added to when somebody reports it, or does it just fall under your health benefits and insurance?
For instances like that, they don't pay anything. So that's a referral as a city service. That's part of our contracted services with the department. But I would also defer to Gillis about officer wellness programs that we're doing in general. And we try to do proactive efforts as well. And I know Deputy Gillis has a program that's actually launching right now that I think he could talk a little bit about on what they're doing as far as proactively going out to districts.
So we have a health and wellness division in the police department. The health and wellness division is made up of sworn and civilian members. It is a avenue for folks who are experiencing potential issues to go to in confidence, to link them with the resources that they might need if we can't provide them at the BPD. And most police departments, it's a best practice to do that around the country. It's becoming in vogue, if you will, to do that. Most of them wait for folks to approach them. And under the commissioner, we have launched a new program, which is to have a mobile field unit that goes out into the field. We look at the crime data. The highest nights of crime in Baltimore, which most people don't realize, at least lately, has been Tuesday evenings. You see a spike in crime. So we have a mobile truck that goes around and actually seeks out interactions with our own workforce to try to check on them and just let them know that we are there. We know that they have the most difficult job in the country, truly, and we are there for them. And that is what this new program is. You guys, I think, are going to be getting some information about it probably Friday. We've been working on some messaging to send to you. Hopefully we can get it to you guys over there against the wall, ultimately to get out there as well. But we recognize as management that as we put more controls on the agency in terms of managing it, we're asking people to do things that they haven't done before, and it does add a little bit of stress. And so this is just another way to give tools and resources to folks and recognize that, yes, we're asking folks to do more, but we are here for them at the same time.
Thank you. That's good to know. I'm happy to hear that, so I can report that out when residents say different things to me in reference to that question. The other thing I'm just curious about under illegal dumping, 70A, is that when things are people calling in right away to say, hey, someone is dumping now? Is that what that 14 handled is?
Not necessarily. No, that could be a historical thing they've seen over the past week or so. It could be something they saw yesterday. It could be something they see right then and there. But that's just a broad category that we have, and it tries to ask those questions as you go through the module. But as far as classification of calls for service, that's the broad category. So it could be something that happened in the last 20 minutes or the last 20 days or the last 2 months.
But we're actually following up on
Yes,
that?
Every one of these calls gets some interaction from one of our folks to make sure that we have all the information, create the report, and then create a follow-up when needed. So,
thank you. That's it, Chairman.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the complete body-worn camera upgrade pilot?
Absolutely.
What that is? Yeah.
So the body-worn cameras have been around for many years, and our partner Axion, who develops the technology, has created some enhancements, some more capability, things like properly or better targeting, or identifying the type of video so that it can be recovered later on, as one of the examples. As a part of any new technology coming into the city, we're going through a pilot process where we're making sure that what they say they can do, it actually does what it says. And so we're in the middle of a pilot now. At the completion of the pilot, we'll examine the results, and if the technology they're proposing to us does what they say it's going to do, then we'll accept the upgrades and go through a process of issuing out the new body-worn cameras to our officers.
Thank you. Can you give me the latest on the auxiliary unit?
Yes. We're always working to recruit more. The auxiliary unit, they've been utilized in crime walks, at neighborhood meetings, and by and large in community policing functions. They have not been deployed for crime-fighting initiatives per se, but mainly in community policing functions and community policing initiatives. And so a number of the things that I attend, district commanders are utilizing auxiliary members at their crime walks, and of course now it's getting dark a little earlier, but for some of their community initiatives.
Do we know how many officers we have in the unit right now?
Yes, sir. We have 10. There's 10 officers in. There's 9 who have graduated who are just waiting to get their certification.
What's the, Colonel, can you tell me a little bit more about that, that process and how long that's going to take?
Yeah, basically what they have to do, they get their background check done, then they go through the training, and then they get their certification. But what we're waiting for is DOJ has to approve the plan and the training that they received. Once they approve that, then they'll get their certification, and those 9 will join the other 10.
Recognizing that that's completely out of your control because it's dependent upon DOJ approving, do we have an estimated or guesstimated time frame for that?
No, not yet.
We could try to touch base with them to see where they are on that project, because it's a number of policies that they're looking at right now. But we can, let's get back to you and see
So
where
they're,
we are.
just
They
so
have
I-
to review every training we do.
You're talking about they're reviewing our policy.
Correct. And so every training, every curriculum, every policy that we do in our department, any changes to it.
I get that.
And
I'm
so
sorry
this is part of that too. So we just need to figure out where it is in the priority list. We can
I get
back
it,
to you on
yeah, and
that.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Chief, but just to get to the heart
Yes,
of the question. So the previous 10 that came in, they came in before DOJ was reviewing.
Yes.
That's why there was no holdup.
Yeah, and they got to review the curriculum that they took before they got certified.
Got it. Okay, so where's that policy at? This is the auxiliary training policy that we're waiting? Okay, and so that's already been submitted to that's already been put out for public comment, submitted to DOJ.
Let me get the timeline on you after this meeting, and we can see where we are, because I'm not sure where it is on DOJ's priority list right
Got
now.
it.
I can
That's
find out for
helpful.
you.
Okay. And then the last thing is, do we know how many officers, auxiliary officers, we have in the next training class? Or when the next training class will be?
We have not started the next training class because we want to wait until we get the approval of these 9, and then we'll start doing the backgrounds for other. But we're constantly recruiting for new auxiliaries.
Do you know off the top of your head, Colonel, how many we have in the hopper that are interested in getting in the next training class?
I do not, but I can find out for you.
Please, and thank you. Colleagues, any other budget-related questions?
Negative.
Okay, we are in recess. Thank you very much. We will start in the next 5 minutes. Your Vice Chair? Public Safety? Okay. Do we know where Yitzi is? Do we know where Yitzi is? We'll find it. You're up to bat.